Kane battled his way out of a poverty-stricken neighborhood in Montreal to scale the heights of NFL stardom, notching 5 seasons with the Seattle Seahawks. Overnight, the kid from the block had fame, money, and a life of luxury at his fingertips. And by his side was his beautiful and devoted girlfriend, Tammara. However, when the glory of the game came to a bitter end, Tommy and Tammara would make headlines for all the wrong reasons. Hello and welcome to The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, author of suspense novels about the dark side of love, and this week I'm putting a spotlight on the case I'm calling Time Out for Murder. For so many little boys growing up, sports is a way of life, and making it big in the big leagues, aka playing professionally, is a reality that many can only dream of. Montreal native Tommy Kane was no different. However, growing up in the rough Little Burgundy neighborhood, one of 3 kids to a single mother working 2 jobs to support the family, making it to the pros seemed like even more of a pipe dream. Located in Montreal's southwest borough, Little Burgundy was dominated by low-income public housing, gangs, drugs, and rampant crime. No one would think a kid growing up in Little Burgundy would have a prayer of playing in the NFL, the NBA, even the Canadian Football League seemed out of reach. For a kid from Little Burgundy, the future was bleak, not bright. But Tommy Kane was more than just some kid from Little Burgundy. He was a sensational athlete, blazing a trail of brilliance and supremacy across many of the city's youth sports leagues as a preteen. Basketball, football, hockey, any sport that Tommy played, he excelled at. He racked up an MVP award over his teammate, future Hall of Famer Mario Lemieux, in the youth hockey league they played in, won a basketball national championship on a college-level team, and another MVP trophy at a prestigious basketball camp for top-tier players in America. For the most part, sports kept Tommy out of trouble and on the straight and narrow, and also gave him a glimpse of what life could be like beyond the borders of Little Burgundy. It was this vision of a better life that led Tommy first to Fanshawe College in Ontario to get his grades up to snuff, and eventually to Syracuse University, a powerhouse in collegiate sports. While hockey was his favorite sport to play, he saw greater potential to escape his rough neighborhood and pull his family out of poverty in the form of a basketball scholarship. However, the lack of a spot on Syracuse's basketball team led to consideration by the football team as a wide receiver, and the rest was history. Tommy scored a football scholarship from Syracuse, eventually receiving All-American honors for his role on the school's legendary undefeated 1987 team, and for setting a still unmatched school record of a career average of 20.7 yards per catch. While Tommy clearly had the chops for the gridiron, coming from Canada, he was a bit of a mystery to his American teammates, as back then, it wasn't common for a Canadian player to come to the States to join one of the big college football programs. And although Tommy had outstanding athletic ability and an armful of awards, he wasn't viewed as a star in the U.S. And as far as his teammates concerned, they're like, well, okay, Tommy's a hard worker, he's a great player, he laughs a lot, he smiles a lot, gosh darn it, people like him. He's Canadian. Everybody's nice in Canada, right? He's cool. There couldn't possibly be anything bad about this guy. You would think. Because what Tommy's teammates didn't know is that he'd had quite a few run-ins with cops back in Little Burgundy, and not just 5-finger discounts or spraying graffiti on a wall. As the New York Times revealed in a 1987 profile of the lauded young wide receiver, Tommy had started stealing cars as far back as elementary school. As Tommy matter-of-factly told the paper, quote, "Sure, I was in trouble with the law, not regularly, but I was in trouble." He later told the Globe and Mail in 1993, quote, "My mother once called the police on me because I stole her car. I was not only a bad kid growing up in Quebec, I was the worst kid. I was in knife fights. I once beat a guy silly with a baseball bat. I broke into houses, broke into cars, stole money. I was busted several times." Tommy did recognize, to his credit, that if he didn't get his shiz together, he was on a path to nowhere. Sports was his ticket to the top, and he told the New York Times, quote, "Most of the kids I was with then are in jail or coming out of jail. They weren't good enough athletes or good enough students." So ultimately, Tommy didn't want to be like the guys he grew up with, notching a bunch of round-trip tickets to jail for the rest of his life. He was going places that didn't include prison. He was going for the brass ring. And when you're a college football player, the brass ring is the NFL. However, instead of making the leap straight to the pros, Tommy was that rare player who actually stayed and graduated from college, getting a degree in retail marketing. And the icing on the cake was getting the nod from the Seattle Seahawks. So now Tommy's about to hit the big time. His dream of pulling his family out of poverty with a big fat NFL contract was about to become a reality. Except Tommy's leaving Syracuse with some dark secrets. Toward the end of his Syracuse tenure, about 2 weeks before the all-important NFL draft, he assaulted a policewoman who was about to tow his car, which was parked legally and had 19 outstanding tickets on it. Tommy lost it when he realized what was happening. He struck the officer with his car when she tried to take the keys out of the ignition. Tommy takes off. She gets in the patrol car and takes off after him for 4 blocks. He gets out of the car and there's a confrontation. He pushes her, he threatens her, and finally, she pulls her gun on him while she waits for backup to arrive. Like so many professional athletes before him, Tommy doesn't get the whole book thrown at him, more like a couple of pages in reality, because the charges were knocked down from second-degree assault, obstruction, and resisting arrest to a mere misdemeanor. In the end, all he had to do was serve about 100 hours of community service, and eventually, there was an out-of-court settlement because the police officer had to go on lifetime disability as a result of the injuries she suffered from the altercation with Tommy. Then there was threatening a family friend who was pregnant. She never showed up in court, so the criminal charge was dropped, but she later filed a lawsuit where she testified Tommy punched her and screamed, quote, "Fuck that bitch. I'll kick the baby out of her stomach." Ouch. Tommy denied that anything had ever happened, however, and the judge bought it, threw the whole thing out. So once again, Tommy walks away. Now all he has to do is turn his attention to living out his NFL dreams. Tommy went to the Seahawks in 1988 as a third-round draft pick, which, had it not been for his legal troubles, it's been said that he would have gone much higher in the draft. This is not unlike Aaron Hernandez years later, who, by now, well documented, he had a lot of off-the-field problems that caused his draft stock to plummet. So it's pretty much the same thing with Tommy, except the Seahawks, like the Patriots did with Hernandez, felt the positives far outweigh the negatives, brought him on board. Cautionary tale, folks. While Tommy wasn't a household name, he was able to say he was a bona fide NFL player, which meant he was pulling in bona fide NFL money. Eventually, he was able to buy his mom a house, a rite of passage for any professional athlete who comes from a poverty-stricken background. And it's not only the money that Tommy's pulling in. There are girls and booze and drugs and the luxurious high-flying lifestyle that comes with being a professional football player. But while Tommy could pretty much have whatever or whoever he wanted, it turns out there was one girl in particular who sparked his interest. Tommy knew Tammara Shaik from junior college. They also had little burgundy friends in common. Tammara, who had landed a good job as a bank teller, hailed from a traditional Trinidadian family and was described as a beautiful, smart, quiet, funny, and loyal girl. The quintessential good girl. What Tammara also has that these other girls that Tommy is messing around with don't have is that she knows where he came from. She knows his background, what he's up against. And so even though there was a little bit of a spark between them, Tammara did have a boyfriend, so nothing really ever happened between them. However, when Tommy came home to Montreal during the off-season, he and Tammara reconnected and they started dating. And when Tommy headed back to Seattle, they continued their romance from a distance. And as a bona fide NFL player, Tommy decides he's going to show Tammara the high life, flying her out to Seattle on a regular basis, taking her to the best restaurants, vacations, jewelry. However, despite all of this extravagance, Tammara remains that grounded girl with a good job and a life of her own, so she really doesn't let any of it go to her head. Still, it's pretty heady stuff for two people who come from really meager beginnings. The couple are deeply in love, and eventually Tammara becomes pregnant, giving birth to a baby boy. Despite how much Tommy loves Tammara, despite having a child together, Tommy is still in the NFL and still very much living that lifestyle of drugs and other women. According to what friends told the TV show Fatal Vows, Tammara was well aware of what Tommy was up to, but, quote, turned a blind eye to his cheating and drug use, taking an out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach. I mean, still, this has to hurt, knowing deep down that the man you love is not staying faithful to you, and you share a child together on top of that. It's not easy. I don't care what anybody says. It's not long, though, before Tommy has other worries than juggling women. While Tommy wasn't an NFL superstar, he was considered a solid member of the Seahawks, eventually working his way up to become a starter during his third and fourth seasons. But like so many football players before him and what will be countless after him, Tommy's high-flying days in the NFL are cut short by injuries. As noted in Fatal Vows, his fifth season ended early because Tommy had, quote, injuries top to bottom. Torn ligaments, hamstring problems, knee problems, ankle problems, surgery needed for both Achilles tendons. As Tommy told the Seattle Times about the Seahawks, quote, I gave them all I had for 5 seasons. Yeah, kidding. By the time he came back to training camp for what would have been the start of his 6th season, the Seahawks cut him loose. Too many injuries, too many liabilities, too much of a headache. At the age of 30, Tommy Kane's NFL career was over. Tommy comes home to Montreal and his loyal and long-suffering girlfriend Tammara and their baby boy. He focuses his energies on getting another NFL team to welcome him to the party, spending the next year in beast mode as he works to get his body back into football shape. Except it's not the NFL that comes calling, but the CFL, aka Canadian Football League, team, the Toronto Argonauts, who offered Tommy another shot at glory. Though, truth be told, it's definitely like going from majors to minors, going from NFL to CFL. It was considered a huge step down from the stadiums and bright lights of the NFL. Still, it gets Tommy back onto the field, and for a little while, it gives him a purpose. However, while Tommy isn't through with football, turns out it's definitely through with him. After 5 games for the Argonauts, Tommy is felled once again by injuries, and in 1994, Tommy's football career is officially over. The end of a professional athlete's career is tough. The adulation is gone, the structure of being told when to show up for practice, for road trips, game days, gone. A lot of the times, the money is gone, and all you can think about is, what am I going to do now? How am I going to fill my time? How am I going to make a living? Now, some of these players are able to forge new careers, find new purpose, and not only survive, but thrive. Others struggle to adjust to this slap of cold water known as their new reality. Initially, Tommy seems as though he's going to fall into this first category of finding something new and satisfying. In fact, his former Syracuse teammate Deval Glover told Saturday Night Magazine, quote, I don't think that Tommy was down or depressed about the injuries and his career ending. In high school and college, we played with guys whose careers were ended by injuries. You understand that going in, that it can all end in one game, on one play. I talked with him at reunions, and he never said anything that made me think he was bitter or broken. Tommy begins volunteering for the West End Sport Association, and that seemed to support this idea because he threw himself into his work there. He was so devoted to the center, he even donated his $70,000 salary from the Argonauts to it. He had spent so much of his time at West End as a kid that he wanted to give back in any way that he could. So he coordinated football camps for the kids and was even frequently known to jump into pickup basketball games. He always credited sports with giving him a ticket out of Little Burgundy, and he wanted to pay it forward and give these kids the tools they would need to grab for the same brass ring he'd once held on to. So while he's passionate about his work at West End, his career is another story, because the struggle was real. No matter how much spaghetti he threw against the wall, he could not make a career stick. There was a short run as a radio commentator for the Montreal Alouettes, which is another football team. He worked in sales for Universal Studios in Orlando. There was a failed furniture store venture. Then there was a stint as the owner of a barbershop, and just a merry-go-round of one bad investment after another. As one friend told Gare Joyce of Saturday Night Magazine, quote, "Other athletes would have doors opened to get into coaching or television work or business, but not Tommy." The same friend insisted, much like Duval Glover, that Tommy, quote, "didn't really let it get him down, not from what I could tell." Well, I have to wonder if either A, Tommy's friends didn't want to see what was going on with him, or if B, he was just that good at hiding his true self. As Tommy's post-football struggles continue, the devoted Tammara continues to be an anchor for him. Even though Tammara had a good job at the bank where she worked, Tommy's job history is pretty spotty, and they do have a little boy to feed, so the couple moves in with her mother to save money. And it's about this time, 10 years into the relationship, that Tommy finally proposes to Tammara, meaning that they will now be a true family. The couple ties the knot on November 4th, 1998. They also have more kids, 4 in total, 3 boys and a girl. However, this is far from a happy family. Tommy continues to spiral out of control. For one, he has a raging cocaine habit, so what little money he has is going to support that. And the women are still there, a lot of them. While there had been a time when Tammara had been willing to look the other way, she couldn't do it anymore. Between supporting the family, raising 4 kids, and Tommy's drug use, she's had it. Just 4 years into their marriage, she's done, and the couple separate. So typically at first, Tommy is like a kid hopped up on sugar at the candy store. He's unleashed, and despite not doing diddly or squat, job-wise, he's partying like he's still in the NFL, which means more drugs, more women, more running the street. He can do what he wants without the shackles of a wife and a family. Tammara, it turns out, is also moving on, and she starts dating. Well, you can guess where this is going, because as soon as Tammara's like, "I've got other distractions to keep myself busy," Tommy's like, wait, what? You mean you're not sitting at home miserable without me? I don't get it. And now, Tommy wants her back. Except Tammara is not coming back. And this is really when Tommy starts to tumble off the cliff. His wife has left him, he's out of work, he's coked up, he's drinking, and he's starting to suffer from the effects of concussions he got from all those years playing football. In short, he's a powder keg. At this juncture, Tommy recognizes that he needs help, and he checks himself into the hospital where he's treated for depression and his drug use. Part of the time that he's there, he's placed into the psychiatric ward because doctors worry about possible suicide attempts. After a little over a month, he is released into his mother's care. Except Tommy's not doing any better. He's back on the cocaine, and he's consumed with Tammara, fixated on her every move. He's a failure. His life is decimated, and he hates himself for everything that he was, everything that he could have been, everything that he's not. He's a loaded gun full of rage and self-hatred. And it won't be long before he turns that revolver onto someone else. His mother, rightfully so, is freaked out and scared because she can see her son is far from stable and far from cured. She reaches out to the doctors at the hospital where Tommy was being treated, but for some inexplicable reason, they tell her he's fine. Again, because his mother has eyes, she knows better. She decides to stage an intervention and get her son into rehab. She reaches out to Tammara to be part of the intervention, and her initial response is not a chance, no way, no how. However, Tommy is still the father of her 4 children, so eventually she relents. November 30th, 2003. Tammara and Hilda St. Louis, a friend of the family and member of the local church, have arrived at the house that Tommy shares with his mother to help with the intervention. Hilda later testified that Tommy was talking about taking his own life. According to Saturday Night Magazine, Tommy thought he and Tammara, with Hilda's help, were going to talk about putting the marriage back together for the sake of their 4 kids, about working things out. Instead, Tammara's trying to get Tommy to agree to go to rehab for the coke and to go on medication for his depression. Tommy realizes Tammara is not coming back. She doesn't want to work things out. And just like his football career, his marriage is really and truly over. And in that moment, he snaps. Tommy grabs Tammara by her hair and drags her into the kitchen as his horrified mother and Hilda desperately try to stop him. He slams her head into the ground repeatedly, the mother of his 4 children, his wife, the woman he vowed to love, honor, and cherish. He smashes her head into that floor over and over and over and over. According to Tommy's mother, her son is also punching his wife in her face, pummeling her with absolutely no mercy. Then he grabs a nearby kitchen knife and plunges it into her neck. Tommy's mother and Hilda manage to wrest it away from him, but he grabs another one and stabs Tammara again. By now, police and paramedics have been called to the house and they transport Tammara to the hospital. But it's too late. She's dead. Tammara Shaik was 35 years old. Initially, Tommy was charged with second-degree murder. However, controversially, he later pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter. According to the CBC, this plea outraged people and ignited protests across Montreal. For his part, Tommy claims he doesn't remember the attack, telling the court that he doesn't have any memory at all of dragging Tammara by her hair into the kitchen, or of grabbing those knives, or of stabbing her. He claimed he was desperate to save the marriage and that, quote, "I would never have hurt Tammara, never. Tammara was the sweetest person." He further addressed his drug addiction, saying, quote, "I was going downhill. I couldn't do anything but put my face in a bucket of cocaine until my heart stopped." But it wouldn't stop. So when prosecutors were deciding on what charges to pursue, they took into account 2 separate psychiatric reports, one from their own psychiatrist and one from the defense, which outlined Tommy's ongoing depression. In addition, in the days before Tammara's murder, Tommy was so high and those drugs were still coursing through him that day. Saturday Night Magazine described Tommy's mugshot as one of a man, quote, "staring 1,000 yards away through a drug-addled fog, coming down and bathed in sweat." Experts ultimately testified that Tommy was out of control and that it had never been his intention to murder his wife. During sentencing, Superior Court Justice Fraser Martin didn't hold back when he, rightly, called out the murder as a, quote, "senseless act by a, quote, manipulative and narcissistic Tommy." He further went on to say, quote, "By your act, Mr. Kane, 4 children are deprived of their mother," calling the circumstances, quote, "particularly shocking." In the end, Tommy was sentenced to 18 years behind bars. Tammara's sister Ava won sole custody of the couple's 4 children, who at the time were all under the age of 8. Ava later filed a $1.2 million lawsuit against Tommy for pain and suffering, which, unbelievably, Tommy's lawyers said that Tammara, quote, "did not suffer any pain prior to the fatal blow." I guess maybe have that lawyer's head slammed into the floor over and over and have a knife plunged into his neck. See how much pain he's feeling. At any rate, Ava was later awarded damages of $590,000, with $125,000 going to each of the children, and Ava getting $90,000. To help pay the debt, Tommy had to sell the house he bought for his mother with his NFL money, the same house where he murdered Tammara. In 2015, Tommy was granted 6 months of day parole as he continued to serve his sentence. According to the Montreal Gazette, Tammara's family asked the parole board to limit where he could go, meaning they did not want him anywhere near them or his kids. The following year, in 2016, the Montreal Gazette reported that Tommy became eligible for statutory release, having served 2/3 of his sentence, which, according to Canadian law, most inmates at federal penitentiaries qualify for this conditional release if they haven't been granted parole before. However, in 2019, Tommy was back behind bars when he violated the conditions of his release. First, he was arrested after he refused to take a urine test, which was mandatory. He was not supposed to use drugs or go to bars, and was required to get counseling and report any romantic, I'm guessing physical too, relationships that he had with women. As the Montreal Gazette reported, Tommy pegged his cocaine relapse to the death of his sister and traveling to the States to undergo testing as part of the NFL's concussion settlement program, which allows players to sue the league for not warning them about the long-term damage of concussions. Tommy said the whole experience brought back, quote, painful memories. The board later reprimanded him but released him, provided he participate in a treatment program instead. It's hard for Tommy's friends to square his downward spiral into a violent, murderous rage with the cool, laid-back, always quick with a smile guy that they'd always known. Wayne Yearwood grew up on the courts of Little Burgundy alongside Tommy, and as he told Saturday Night Magazine, quote, "It's just not rational to beat to death the mother of your children. I don't know what it was that pushed him that far. I don't know what could. It wasn't the Tommy I knew that did that." In that same interview, Tommy's Syracuse teammate Don McPherson lamented about the red flags he'd missed over the years, saying, quote, "I thought I knew him so well." Maybe the only person Tommy showed his true self to was his wife. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, and show your love for The Dark Side of Love by visiting thedarksideoflove.com for show notes and transcripts. Also, while you're there, you can find a link to my Patreon page where you can access bonus episodes and other fun stuff. Learn more about my suspense novels about The Dark Side of Love by visiting biancasloan.com. Thanks for hanging out with me, and join me next time for another tale of love gone wrong. I'll see you on the dark side.